For today's video, I'm going to read National Geographic, the cover article, The Real Jesus. This is December 2017, National Geographic. After I read the article, I'm going to go flip through the magazine and skim through the other articles and show you all the pictures. Here it is. Search for the real Jesus. And it has all these different portraits of and paintings of Jesus all over from all over time and all over the world. The search for the real Jesus. Believers revere him as the Son of God. Skeptics dismiss him as legend. Artists have cast him in images that reflect their own time and place. Today's archaeologists digging in the Holy Land are helping to sift fact from fiction. Worshipping in Jerusalem's Church of the Holy Sepulchre, surround the restored Ediculo, a shrine that Christian tradition says was built over the burial place of Jesus Christ. The shrine attracted global attention in 2016 when restorers uncovered remnants of the ancient tombs behind its ornate walls. In Jerusalem, Jesus healed a paralyzed man at a ritual pool surrounded by 5 colonnades called the Pool of Bethesda, reports the Gospel of John. Many scholars doubted that place existed until archaeologists discovered the clear traces of it beneath the ruins of these centuries-old churches. Rising from her baptism in the Jordan River, an Indonesian Christian wears a gown depicting Jesus undergoing the same rite in the river 2,000 years ago. The faith that began as a tiny Jewish sect is now the world's largest, most diverse religion, with more than 2 billion believers. A bejeweled icon, or encolpion, worn by Theophilos III, Greek Orthodox Patriarch of Jerusalem and all of Palestine, venerates the Virgin Mary and the Christ child. The office of Eugenio Aliata in Jerusalem looks like the home base of any archaeologist who'd rather be in the fields dirtying his hands than the indoors tidying things up. A tumble of dusty, defunct computer equipment sits in one corner. The excavation reports share crowded shelves with measuring reels and other tools of the trade. It feels like the office of every archaeologist I've met in the Middle East, except for Aliata is wearing the chocolate brown habit of a Franciscan friar, and his headquarters are in the monastery of the Flagellation. According to church tradition, the monastery marks the spot where Jesus Christ, condemned to death, was scourged by Roman soldiers and crowned with thorns. Tradition is a word you hear a lot in this corner of the world. where throngs of tourists and pilgrims are drawn to dozens of sites that, according to tradition, are touchstones of the life of Christ, from his birthplace in Bethlehem to his burial place in Jerusalem. For an archaeologist turned journalist like me, ever mindful that the entire cultures rose and fell and left few traces of their time on earth, searching an ancient landscape for shards of single life feels like a fool's errand, like chasing a ghost, and when that ghost is none other than Jesus Christ, believed by more than 2 billion of the world's people to be the very Son of God, well, the assignment tempts one to seek divine guidance. Which is why, in my repeated visits to Jerusalem, I keep coming back to the monastery of the Flagellation, where Father Aliada always welcomes me and my questions with bemused patience. As a professor of Christian archaeology and director of the Studium Biblicum Franciscanum's Museum, he's part of a 700-year-old Franciscan mission to look after and protect the ancient religious sites of the Holy Land, and since the 19th century to excavate them according to scientific principles. As a man of faith, Father Aliada seems at peace with what archaeology can and cannot reveal about Christianity's central figure. It will be something rare, strange, to have archaeological proof for a specific person 2,000 years ago, he concedes, leaning back in his chair and folding his arms over his vestments. But you can't say that Jesus doesn't have a trace in history. By far the most important and possibly most debated of those traces of the text of the New Testament, especially the first 4 books, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But how do those ancient texts written in the second half of the 1st century and the traditions they inspired relate to the work of an archaeologist? Tradition gives more life to archaeology, and archaeology gives more life to tradition, Father Aliada replies. Sometimes they go together well, sometimes not. He pauses, offering a small smile, which is more interesting. And so, with Father Aliada's blessing, I set out to walk the footsteps of Jesus, retracing his story as told by the Gospel writers and interpreted by generations of scholars. Along the way, I hope to discover how Christian texts and traditions stack up against the discoveries of archaeologists who began sifting the sands of the Holy Land in earnest some 150 years ago. But before I begin my pilgrimage, I need to probe an explosive question that lurks in the shadows of historical Jesus studies. Might it be Did I show you this? I think I did. It's worth another show. Might it be possible that Jesus never even existed, that the whole stained glass story is pure invention? It's an assertion that's championed by some outspoken skeptics, but not, I discovered, by scholars, particularly archaeologists, whose work tends to bring flights of fancy down to literal earth. These are the ruins of Herodium. The ruins of Herodium, once one of the Herod the Great's summit fortresses, evoke the oppressive power of the Roman Empire. Some scholars regard Jesus as a social revolutionary whose true mission was regime change rather than the salvation of souls. I don't know any mainstream scholar who doubts the historicity of Jesus, said Eric Myers, an archaeologist and emeritus professor in Judaic studies at the Duke University. The details have been debated for centuries, but no one who is serious doubts that he's a historical figure. I heard much the same from Byron McCain, an archaeologist and professor at Florida Atlantic University. I can think of no other example who fits into their time and place so well, but people say he doesn't exist, he said. Even John Dominic Crossan, a former priest and co-chair of the Jesus Seminar, a controversial scholarly forum, believes the radical skeptics go too far. Granted, the stories of Christ's miraculous deeds, healing the sick with words, feeding a multitude with a few morsels of bread and fish, even restoring life to a corpse 4 days dead, are hard for modern minds to embrace. But that's no reason to conclude that Jesus of Nazareth was a religious fable. Now, you can say he walks on water and nobody can do that, so therefore he doesn't exist. Well, that's something else, Crossan told me when we spoke by phone. The general fact that he did certain things in Galilee, that he did certain things in Jerusalem, that got himself executed, all of that, I think, fits perfectly into a certain scenario. Scholars who study Jesus divide in two opposing camps, separated by a very bright line. Those who believe the wonder-working Jesus of the Gospels is the real Jesus, and those who think the real Jesus, the man who inspired the myth, hides below the surface of the Gospels and must be revealed by historical research and literary analysis. Both camps claim archaeology as their ally, leading to some fractious debates and strange bedfellows. Whoever Jesus Christ was or is, God, man, or the greatest literary hoax in history, the diversity and the devotion of his modern disciples are on colorful parade when I arrive in Bethlehem. The ancient city is identified as his birthplace. The tour buses that cross the checkpoint from Jerusalem to the West Bank carry a virtual United Nations of pilgrims. One by one, the buses park and discharge their passengers, who emerge blinking in the dazzling sun. Indian women in splashy saris, Spaniards in backpacks, emblazoned with the logo of their local parish, Ethiopians in snow-white robes with indigo crucifixes tattooed on their foreheads. I catch up to a group of Nigerian pilgrims in Manger Square, and follow them through the low entrance of the Church of the Nativity. The soaring aisles of the basilica are shrouded in tarps and scaffolding. A conservation team is busy cleaning centuries of candle soot from the 12th century gilded mosaics that flank the upper walls, above elaborately carved cedar beams erected in the 6th century. We carefully circle a section of the columns of a partially restored 2nd to 5th century synagogue in Capernaum lie atop an older structure very likely visited by Jesus. According to some scholars, nearby archaeologists discovered a dwelling that was venerated by early Christians, possibly the home of Apostle Peter. We carefully circle a section of floor cut open to reveal the earliest incarnation of the church, built in the 330s on orders of Rome's first Christian empire, Constantine. Another series of steps takes us down into a lamplit grotto and a small marble-clad niche. Here, a silver star marks the very spot where, according to tradition, Jesus Christ was born. The pilgrims ease to their knees to kiss the star and press their palms to the cool, polished stone. Soon a church official entreats them to hurry along and give others a chance to touch the holy rock and, by faith, the Holy Child. The Church of the Nativity is the oldest Christian church still in daily use, but not all scholars are convinced that Jesus of Nazareth was born in Bethlehem. Treasures from Jesus' time, unearthed in a synagogue in the hometown of Mary Magdalene. The Magdala stone is thought to be modeled after the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. It may have served as a ceremonial Torah stand. It is shown here in Israel's National Treasures storerooms. The Church of the Nativity, scholars born in Bethlehem. Not all scholars are convinced that Jesus of Nazareth was born in Bethlehem. Only 2 of the 4 Gospels mention his birth, and they provide diverging accounts. The traditional manger and shepherds in Luke, the wise men, massacre of children, and flight to Egypt in Matthew. Some suspect that the Gospel writers located Jesus' nativity in Bethlehem to tie Galilean peasants to the Judean city prophesied in the Old Testament as the birthplace of the Messiah. Archaeology is largely silent on the matter. After all, what are the odds of unearthing any evidence of a peasant couple's fleeting visit 2 millennia ago? Excavations at and around the Church of Nativity have so far turned up no artifacts dating to the time of Christ, nor any sign that early Christians considered the site sacred. The first clear evidence of veneration comes from the 3rd century, when theologian Origen of Alexandria visited Palestine and noted, "In Bethlehem there is shown the cave where Jesus was born." Early in the 4th century, the Emperor Constantine sent an imperial delegation to the Holy Land to identify places associated with the life of Christ and hallow them with churches and shrines. Having located what they believe was the site of the Nativity Grotto, the delegates erected an elaborate church, the forerunner of the present-day basilica. Many of the scholars I spoke to are neutral on the questions of Christ's birthplace, the physical evidence being too elusive to make a call. To their minds, the old adage that I learned in Archaeology 101, absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, applies here. The trail of the real Jesus has gone cold in Bethlehem. It grows much warmer 65 miles north in Galilee, the rolling hill country of northern Israel. As the names Jesus of Nazareth and Jesus the Nazarene suggest, Jesus was raised in Nazareth, a small agricultural village in southern Galilee. Scholars who understand him in strictly human terms as a religious reformer, or a social revolutionary, or an apocalyptic prophet, or even a Jewish jihadist, plumb the political, economic, and social currents of first-century Galilee to discover the forces that gave rise to man and his mission. By far the mightiest force at the time shaping the life in Galilee was the Roman Empire, which had subjugated Palestine some 60 years before Jesus' birth. All Jews chafed under Rome's iron-fisted rule, with its oppressive taxes and idolatrous religion. Many scholars believe this social unrest set the stage for the Jewish agitator who burst onto the seen denouncing the rich and powerful and pronouncing blessings on the poor and marginalized. Others imagine the onslaught of Greco-Roman culture molding Jesus into a less Jewish, more cosmopolitan champion of social justice. In 1991, John Dominic Crossan published a bombshell of a book, The Historical Jesus, in which he put forward the theory that the real Jesus was a wandering sage whose countercultural lifestyle and subversive sayings bore striking parallels to the cynics. These peripatetic philosophers of ancient Greece, while not cynical in the modern sense of the word, thumbed their unwashed noses at social conventions such as cleanliness and the pursuit of wealth and status. Crossan's unorthodox thesis was inspired partly by archaeological discoveries showing that Galilee, long thought to have been a rural backwater and an isolated Jewish enclave, was in fact becoming more urbanized and Romanized during Jesus' day than scholars once imagined, and partly by the fact that Jesus' boyhood home was just 3 miles from Sepphoris, the Roman provincial capital. Although the city isn't mentioned in the Gospels, an ambitious building campaign fueled by Galilee's ruler, Herod Antipas would have attracted skilled workers from all the surrounding villages. It is reasonable to imagine Jesus, a young craftsman living nearby, working at Sepphoris and, like a college freshman, testing the boundaries of his religious upbringing. On a brilliant spring day, after rains have left the Galilean hills awash the wildflowers, I hike around the ruins of Sepphoris with Eric and Carol Myers, the Duke University archaeologists. I consulted at the start of my odyssey. The husband and wife team spent 33 years excavating the sprawling site, which became the nexus of a heated academic debate about the Jewishness of Galilee and, by extension, of Jesus himself. Eric Myers, lanky. This is a map where Jesus walked. For nearly 2,000 years, the places connected to Jesus of Nazareth have captured the imagination of pilgrims, followers, and scholars. The details of his life and teaching come from the New Testament Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Each book is reputed to have been written by another apostle or a close acquaintance in those of Jesus' inner circle. And here's the map where Jesus walked. Was this the tomb of Jesus? Archaeologists have discovered that Jerusalem's Church of the Holy Sepulchre stands at the site of a Jewish cemetery dating back to the time of Jesus. The shrine at the heart of the church, known as Edicule, Rite, encases remnants of a tomb recovered since the 4th century. Was this Jesus' tomb? The evidence is inconclusive, but the site's layered history, illustrated here, holds many clues. Christianity's holiest site, Founded in the 4th century, Jerusalem's Church of the Holy Sepulchre enshrines the place where many Christians believe Jesus Christ was crucified, buried, and raised from the dead. Jesus' Jerusalem. Today, Old City bears little resemblance to the place where Jesus walked and taught. Raised by the Romans in AD 70. It was rebuilt in 135 as a new city of Aelia Capitolia. Periods of Christian and Muslim construction followed. During Passover, Samaritan men walked to the top of Mount Gerizim, the site they believe of God's true temple rather than Jerusalem. The Samaritans of Jesus' day were despised as infidels, yet Jesus is one of the most famous parables, cast a good Samaritan as an exemplar of neighborly love. Eric Myers, lanky and white-haired, pauses in front of a pile of columns. It's pretty acrimonious, he says, recalling the decades-long dispute over the influence of Hellenizing a city of young Jewish peasant. Of a Hellenizing city on a young Jewish peasant. He stops at the top of a hill and waves his hands across a sprawl of neatly excavated walls. We had to dig through a bivouac from the 1948 war, including a live Syrian shell to get to these houses, he explains. And underneath we found the mikvaot. At least 30 mikvahs or Jewish ritual baths dot the residential quarter of Sepphoris, the largest domestic concentrated ever found by archaeologists. The largest domestic concentration ever found by archaeologists, along with ceremonial stone vessels and striking absence of pig bones, pork being shunned by kosher-keeping Jews. They offer clear evidence that even in this imperial Roman city remained a very Jewish place during Jesus' formative years. This and other insights gleaned from excavations across Galilee and have led to a significant shift in scholarly opinion, says Greg Evans, professor of Christian origins in the School of Christian Thought at Houston Baptist University. Thanks to archaeology, there has been a change in thinking, from Jesus the cosmopolitan Hellenist to Jesus the observant Jew. When Jesus was about 30 years old, he waded into the Jordan River with the Jewish firebrand John the Baptist, and according to the New Testament accounts, he underwent a life-changing experience. Rising from the water, he saw the Spirit of God descend upon him like a dove, and heard the voice of God proclaim, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." The divine encounter launched Jesus on a preaching and healing mission that began in Galilee and ended 3 years later with his execution in Jerusalem. One of his first stops was Capernaum, a fishing town on the northwest shore of a large freshwater lake called, confusingly, the Sea of Galilee. Here followers met the fishermen who became his first followers, Peter and Andrew casting nets, James and John mending theirs, and established this first base of operation. Commonly referred to on the Christian tour route as the Town of Jesus, the pilgrimage site of Capernaum today is owned by the Franciscans and surrounded by a high metal fence. A sign the gate makes clear what's not allowed inside: dogs, guns, cigarettes, and short skirts. Directly beyond the gate is an incourageously modern church mounted on the 8 pillars that resemble a spaceship hovering high above a pile of ruins. This is St. Peter's Memorial, consecrated in 1990 over one of the biggest discoveries made during the 20th century by archaeologists investigating the historical Jesus. Scenes from the life of Christ include his infancy, a triumphal entry into Jerusalem, and the Last Supper. Adorn a small Coptic Orthodox chapel in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Several Christian sects warily share the cavernous sanctuary, each laying claim to a chapel or other space. Keys to the church are entrusted to a local Muslim family. From its odd perch, the church offers a stunning view of the lake. But all eyes are drawn to the center of the building, where visitors peer over a railing through a glass floor into the ruins of an octagonal church built some 1,500 years ago. When Franciscan archaeologists excavated beneath the structure in 1968, they discovered it had been built on the remains of a first-century house. There was evidence that this private home had been transformed into a public meeting place in the span of a short time. By the second half of the 1st century, just a few decades after the crucifixion of Jesus, the home's rough stone walls had been plastered over and household kitchen items replaced with oil lamps. Characteristic of a community gathering place, over the following centuries, entreaties to Christ were etched into the walls. And by the time Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, the 4th century, the dwelling had been expanded onto an elaborately decorated house of worship. Since the structure of this has commonly been known as the Gospels note that Jesus cured Peter's mother-in-law, ill with fever, at her home in Capernaum. Word of the miracles spread quickly, and by evening a suffering crowd had gathered at her door. Jesus healed the sick and delivered people possessed by demons. Accounts of large crowds coming to Jesus for healing are consistent with what archaeology reveals about the 1st century Palestine, where diseases such as leprosy and tuberculosis were rife. According to a study of burials in Roman Palestine by archaeologist Byron McCain, between 2/3 and 3/4 of the surveyed graves held the remains of children. Just hours before his arrest and crucifixion, according to the Gospels, Jesus prayed in a garden called Gethsemane, probably from the Aramaic word for oil press. Today, many pilgrims come to this grove of olive trees just outside the walls of Jerusalem to remember the darkest night of Jesus' life. Two-thirds and 3/4 of the surveyed graves held the remains of children and adolescents. survived the perilous years of childhood, and your chances of living to old age greatly increased, McCain says. During Jesus' sick time, getting past 15 was apparently the trick. From Capernaum, I head south along the sea to Galilee, to a kibbutz, a communal farm that in 1986 was the scene of great excitement and had an emergency excavation. A severe drought had drastically lowered the lake's water level, and as two brothers from the community hunted for ancient coins in the mud-exposed lake bed, they spotted the faint outline of a boat. Archaeologists who examined the vessel found artifacts dating to the Roman era inside and next to the hull. Carbon-14 testing later confirmed the boat's age. It was roughly from the lifetime of Jesus. Efforts to keep the discovery under wraps soon failed as news of Jesus' boat sent a stampede of relic hunters scouring the lake shore. If the skeptics were right, their claim would shred the Gospel's portrait of Jesus as a faithful synagogue goer. Stampede of relic hunters scouring the lakeshore, threatening the fragile artifact. Just then the rains returned, and the lake level began to rise. The round-the-clock rescue of excavation that ensued was an archaeological feat for the record books. A project that would normally take months to plan and execute was complete, start to finish, in just 11 days. Once exposed to the air, the boat's waterlogged timbers would quickly disintegrate, so archaeologists supported the remains with fiberglass frame and polyurethane foam and floated it to safety. Today, the treasured boat has the pride of place in a museum on the kibbutz, near the spot where it was discovered, measuring 7.5 feet wide and 27 feet long. It could have accommodated 13 men, although there's no evidence that Jesus and his 12 apostles used this very vessel. To be candid, it's not much to look at. A skeleton of planks repeatedly patched and repaired until it was finally stripped and scuttled. They had to nurse this boat until they couldn't nurse it any longer, says Cresson, who likens the vessel to some of those cars you see in Havana. But its value to historians is incalculable, he says. Incalculable. Seeing how hard they had to work to keep that boat afloat tells me a lot about the economics of the Sea of Galilee and the fishing at the time of Jesus. Another dramatic discovery occurred just over a mile south of the Jesus boat. At the site of ancient Magdala, a hometown of Mary Magdalene, a devoted follower of Jesus, Franciscan archaeologists began excavating part of the town during the 1970s. But the northern half lay under a defunct lake resort called Hawaii Beach. Enter Father Juan Solana, a papal appointee charged with overseeing a pilgrimage guest house in Jerusalem. In 2004, Solana felt the leading of Christ to build a pilgrim's retreat in Galilee. So he set about to raise millions of dollars in buying up parcels of waterfront land, including the failed resort. As construction was about to begin in 2009, archaeologists from the Israel Antiquities Authority showed up to survey this site, as required by law. After a few weeks of probing the rocky soil, they were startled to discover the buried ruins of a synagogue from the time of Jesus, the first such structure unearthed in Galilee. The find was especially significant because it put to rest an argument made by skeptics that no synagogues existed in Galilee until decades after Jesus' death. If those skeptics were right, their claim would shred the Gospel's portrait of Jesus. as a faithful synagogue goer who often proclaimed his message and performed miracles in these Jewish meeting places. Archaeologists excavated their ruins and uncovered walls lined with benches, indicating that this was a synagogue and a mosaic floor. At the center of the room, they were astounded to find a stone about the size of a footlocker that showed the most sacred elements of the temple in Jerusalem carved in relief. This is Death on a Roman Cross. A crucified man's heel bone found in a family tomb may rebut the charge that Jesus, executed as a criminal, would not have been given a proper burial. Roman crucifixion took many forms. The discovery of the Magdala stone, the artifact, has come to be called, struck a death blow to the once fashionable notion that Galileans were impious hillbillies detached from Israel's religious center. As archaeologists continued to dig, they discovered an entire town buried less than a foot below the surface. The ruins were so well preserved that some began calling Magdala the Israeli Pompeii. Archaeologist Dina Avshalom Gorney walks through the site, pointing out the remains of storerooms, ritual baths, and an industrial area where fish may have been processed and sold. I can just imagine women buying fish in the market right there, she says, nodding towards the foundations of stone stalls. And who knows, maybe those women include the town's infamous native daughter, Mary of Magdala. Father Solana comes over to greet us, and I asked him what he tells visitors who want to know whether Jesus ever walked these streets. We can't expect to answer that, he admits, but we see the number of times that the Gospel mentioned Jesus in a Galilee synagogue. Considering the fact that the synagogue was active during his ministry and just a brief sail from Capernaum, Solana concludes, we have no reason to deny or doubt that Jesus was here. Egyptian Orthodox pilgrims celebrate Easter atop a church of the Holy Sepulchre. In a long dispute with Egyptian copts, Ethiopian monks have occupied a rooftop monastery for more than 200 years to press their claim to a portion of the church. At each stop along my journey through Galilee, Jesus' faint footprints seem to grow a bit more distinct, a shade more discernible. But it's not until I return to Jerusalem that they finally come to vivid focus. The New Testament. The ancient city is settling for many of its miracles and most dramatic moments. His triumphal entry, the cleansing of the temple, his healing miracles at the pools of Bethesda and Siloam, both of which have been undiscovered by archaeologists, his clashes with the religious authorities, his last Passover meal, his agonized prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, his trial and execution, his burial and resurrection. Unlike the disparate stories of Jesus' birth, the four Gospels reach much closer agreement than their account of his death. Following his arrival in Jerusalem for Passover, Jesus is brought before the high priest Caiaphas and charged with blasphemy and threats against the temple. condemned to death by the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. He is crucified on a hill outside the city walls and buried in a rock-cut tomb nearby. The traditional location of that tomb, in what is now the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, is considered the holiest site of Christianity. It is also the place that sparked my quest for the real Jesus. In 2016, I made several trips to the Church of the Documents to document the historic restoration of Edicule, the shrine that houses the repute tomb of Jesus. Now, during Easter week, I return to see it all in a soot-scrubbed, reinforced glory. Standing shoulder to shoulder with holiday pilgrims waiting to enter the tiny shrine, I recall the nights spent inside the empty church with the conservation team, coming upon darkened nooks etched with centuries of graffiti and burials of Crusader kings. I marvel at the many archaeological discoveries made in Jerusalem and elsewhere over the years that lend credibility to the scriptures and traditions surrounding the death of Jesus, including an ornate ossuary that may contain the bones of Caiaphas, an inscription attesting to the rule of Pontius Pilate. A pilgrim inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre kneels at the stone of Unction, which commemorates the anointing of Jesus' body for burial. An inscription attesting to the rule of Pontius Pilate, and a heel bone driven through with an iron crucifixion nail, found in the Jerusalem burial of a Jewish man named Yehohanan. I am also struck by the many lines of evidence that converge on this ancient church. Just yards from the tomb of Christ are other rock-hewn tombs of this period, affirming that this church, destroyed and rebuilt twice, was indeed constructed over a Jewish burial ground. I recall being alone inside the tomb after its marble cladding was briefly removed, overwhelmed that I was looking at one of the world's most important monuments, a simple limestone shelf that people have revered for millennia, a site that I hadn't seen for possibly 1,000 years. I was overwhelmed by all the questions of history. I hope this brief and spectacular moment of exposure would eventually answer. Today on my Easter visit, I find myself inside the tomb again, squeezed alongside 3 kerchiefed Russian women. The marble is back in place, protecting the burial bed from their kisses and all of the rosaries and prayer cards rubbed endlessly on its time-polished surface. The youngest woman whispers entreaties for Jesus to heal her son Yevgeny, who has leukemia. A priest standing outside the entrance loudly reminds us that our time is up, that other pilgrims are waiting. Reluctantly, the women stand up and follow out, and I follow. At this moment, I realize that to sincere believers, the scholar's quest for the historical, non-supernatural Jesus is of little consequence. That quest will be endless, full of shifting theories, unanswerable questions, irreconcilable facts. But for true believers, the faith in the life and the death and the resurrection of the Son of God will be evidence enough. The shrinking kingdom of the jaguar. The elusive predator of North and South America is celebrated as a spiritual symbol. Now the cat faces threats that could make its distinctive image just a memory. A 10-month-old jaguar cub is caught in the infrared beam of the camera trap as it returns to the safety of its tree in Brazil's Pentegal region, the world's largest tropical wetland and one of the last bastions for jaguars. Mothers coax cubs into climbing trees early so they can learn to avoid predators. A mother grooms her cubs. A mother grooms her cubs on the bank of the Tres Irmãos River in Pantanal. Jaguars mate at any time of year and bear a litter of 1 to 4 after about 300 days. When the cubs are a couple of months old, the mother begins weaning them, exposing them to wounded prey to help them learn hunting skills. Peruvian shaman Maestro Juan Flores stands by the boiling river, once avoided by locals because of the deadly jaguars and otherworldly forces. Today, the only jaguars here are those he beckons from the spirit world. Maestro Juan sought traditional cures here after he was shot in the legs. He later founded his Mayan Toyaku shamanic healing center nearby. Keeping the jaguars connected. Jaguars are a single species with no subspecies, which means that all populations are connected through migration and breeding. Ensuring links through the Americas among the core populations of these stealthy hunters, which are reluctant to cross the unfamiliar areas, will be essential as their range is increasingly fragmented by human development. So all of the green, the sage green is the jaguar conservation areas. And the red outline is the habitat corridors. Pictures of jaguars dominate rock art discovered on more than 80 cliff faces and outcroppings in Colombia's Chiribiquete National Park. For decades, the park, located in one of the South America's wildest jungles, remained off-limits as armed groups in the area battled the military. Scientists believe some of the depictions of the animals and other symbols could be up to 20,000 years old. A precision bite to its vulnerable skull quickly turns this caiman into a hearty meal. The cats will hunt on land, in water, and on trees. Their diet consists of more than 85 species, including deer, buffalo, sheep, wild pigs, sloths, monkeys, rodents, turtles, armadillos, and birds. A killer bite. Jaguars have the most powerful bite relative to their size of all the big cats. Agile hunters both on land and in water, and with jaws that can slice straight through the bone. Jaguars can feed on armored prey ranging from armadillos to seemingly impenetrable caimans. How can one call jaguar spirits from the forest if the forest has no jaguars? A jaguar chases a caiman in the Pantanal, given the cat's broad diet and comfort in water. Prowling a riverbank is like scanning a buffet line, says biologist and National Geographic emerging explorer Luke Dollar. They will even dive into the water to snatch large fish. As a cub, this male jaguar was smuggled onto a bus in southern Colombia and was headed for the underground pet trade when he was rescued by authorities. His mother had been killed by a rancher whose cow she had attacked. Since this young cat didn't learn survival skills from his mother, he can never be released into the wild. Today he lives in Cabildo Verde, a nature reserve in Sabana de Torres, Colombia. A mother and cub patrol along the Cioba River after dusk. The dim light offers good hunting. The Maya believe that the jaguar's spirits battled underworld forces at night to allow the sun to rise and life to go on. Now conservationists battle deforestation and poaching to allow the jaguar's world to endure. On the trail of jaguar poachers, as Chinese investment floods into Bolivia, the spotted cats are under siege because of a booming market for their teeth and their skulls. Left. In China, jaguar teeth are likely being used as substitutes for tiger teeth, which are turned into necklaces and worn as status symbols, or in the belief that they will protect the wearer from evil. Above, the trade isn't limited to Bolivia. In a community outside Iquitos, Peru, villagers sell the skins of jaguars they shot. They say once a year someone from a nearby Chinese corporation comes to buy the canines, but not the skins. Africa's Tech Generation, Designing for Africa. In the objective of many new technology ventures, the continent is still a largely untapped market, particularly in a remote, off-the-grid places. Mark Camus, the director of the User Experience Design for BRCK in Nairobi, Kenya's capital, holds a prototype for a mobile weather station. The desire to teach their children about computers drew these Samburu women to a classroom in a settlement in north of Nairobi. They are learning about tablets designed to withstand tough use that connected to the internet through satellite and come preloaded with educational programs. Technology has now arrived in isolated regions of Africa, primarily in the form of relatively inexpensive cell phones. Entrepreneurs collaborate at a popular technology innovation center in Nairobi called iHub, where they share ideas, take classes, and participate in hackathons, competing to solve the challenging software problems. Young, tech-savvy Africans have flocked to Kenya's nascent version of Silicon Valley, nicknamed Silicon Savannah, seeking the money and expertise to create the groundbreaking technology solutions. One day in 2004, in the Kenyan farming village of Engineer, So named because an Englishman once ran a mechanical repair shop there. A slight and nearsighted boy was walking past the only printing shop when his eyes fell on something he had never seen: a computer. An Uber-like company aims to help riders find safe motorcycle drivers. Peter Karuki, who taught himself to code as a child, hopes his safe motos will transform transportation in Africa, starting in Rwanda. Investing in the future, Rwanda has pledged to educate students about the digital world, connect its citizens to the internet, and build a knowledge-based economy by 2020, a goal reflected in its 500 franc note. Building tech capacity, Rwanda partnered with Zipline, a California company, to deliver blood and plasma inside drones, creating technical jobs for people like flight operator Oliva Mugiraneza. A tech-enabled loan made it possible for Eunice Nirajorji Wright, who lives in Kenya, to spend $200 to buy a pig and some feed. Using Farm Drive, a mobile phone app that keeps farm records, she was able to demonstrate to a bank that she is creditworthy. Paris Bazire, one of the founders of Farm Drive, shows Nirogi how to get the most from the app. Nirogi has since made all the payments on the loan. Bringing robots to classrooms. The objective of FundiBots, a company in Kampala, Uganda, that creates kits to encourage students to learn more about such subjects as mechanics and electronics. Good paying work has come with some Africa's tech innovations, such as Safe Motos, which has more than 400 licensed motorcycle taxi drivers in Kigali. Fred Hakizimana has driven for the company for more than a year. It has been life-changing for him and his family. Now he sometimes makes twice what he did when he drove on his own. With the money, he bought a new house and sends his children to a private school. When you and I need something, we go to Amazon. In the village, we have to invent it. Young women learn code at the event in Uganda that used curriculum from Rails Girls, a non-profit started in Finland that aims to teach girls and young women how to build their own web apps from scratch. Aspiring to protect the environment through innovative technology, Jessica Chaig is studying computers in a college near Nairobi. She first became interested in computers when she was 10 years old. Young, alone, and stranded, stuck in Serbia, thousands of refugee children traveling by themselves dream of asylum in the EU, but it doesn't want them. It doesn't want them. Shersha, age 15, from Afghanistan, takes a shelter in a derelict train car at Belgrade's Central Railway Station. In recent years, have seen a jump in the number of unaccompanied children escaping hardship and conflict. Old beyond his years, Degala, 8, has not told his parents in Afghanistan about his brutal journey to Europe. They asked if I faced a hard time, but I said no, as I did not want them to worry. Above, a 14-year-old boy from Afghanistan washes himself on a frigid day in Belgrade. Few, if any, lone refugees are girls. According to UNICEF Serbia, given the grave threat of sexual and physical abuse in their mostly patriarchal cultures, boys gather in an abandoned warehouse in Belgrade that was later demolished to make way for a new property development. They were moved to government-run shelters. Above, Asadullah 11, an Afghan standing, prays and sit before trying to sneak across the nearby border to Croatia. Guards turned him back. Undeterred, he still hopes to join a cousin in the United Kingdom. Below, a glimpse inside the refugee center in Obrenovac, one of 18 across Serbia, that provides food and accommodation, but little else to fill the day. Unaccompanied children are generally housed apart from families and men. Hamid, 16, cooks in an abandoned space in Sid. UNICEF's Michael St. Lot says he hopes children like Hamid will apply for asylum in Serbia rather than risk continuing their dangerous journeys. Spirits of the Silk Road. A 1,500-mile walk along the famous trade route recalls a time when the world came together in Central Asia. A traditional sheepskin coat blows in the wind in Turkol, Uzbekistan, on a roadway that follows the ancient Silk Road. It wasn't a single road, but a network of commercial routes that once traversed much of the Eastern Hemisphere. Islambek Akmagambetov, a laid-off oil worker, has a snack at a truck stop diner in Kazakhstan's oil-rich Mangostau region. Oil replaced many commodities once traded along the Silk Road, but low prices have led to flatlining employment. Two brothers and their brides await to be married in a lavish ceremony at a wedding hall in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. The city, now the country's capital, was a long stopping place for camel caravans plying on the Silk Road. Water, clean, fresh, drinkable water. Children in Aktau, Kazakhstan, play on a crumbling pier jutting into the Caspian Sea, the largest inland body of water on Earth. Aktau has long been Kazakhstan's sole seaport. connecting the country's trade routes with Russia, Azerbaijan, Iran, and Turkey. The Registan is the square in the heart of the ancient Silk Road hub of Samarkand, now a World Heritage Site in Uzbekistan. Restoration of its medieval architecture began decades ago under the former Soviet Union and continues today. Women cover their eyes in prayer doing Betashar, a Kazakh ritual in which the bride reveals her face. Weddings can be hours-long affairs marked by family negotiations before the bride is accepted into the groom's family. The Silk Road wasn't a camel rut-worn steppe. It was an idea, a prototype for globalization. Silk was only its brand. Crossroads revival. More a network than a single path, the Silk Road emerged over centuries of interaction and trade. Routes shifted as empires rose and fell. Traffic declined after the rise of the maritime trade. Regional powers now want to revive these historic commercial lifelines to better connect with Asia, Europe, and beyond. A Soviet-era passenger jet looms just outside a cafe in Dijon, Uzbekistan. A key stopping point on the old Silk Road, the city was the site of government massacre in 2005 when military forces fired into a crowd of people protesting the country's economic and political conditions, killing more than 700 people. Women weave silk in Marjalan, Crafts Development Center in Marjalan, Uzbekistan, a way station on the Silk Road. The center was established in 2007 to preserve and revive traditional crafts such as carpet weaving, block printing, and embroidery. Classes are also taught on how to breed silkworms and create textiles. At the height of its power, the Muslim world flourished precisely because it was tolerant, open, and inquiring. The freewheeling and polyglot spirit of the Silk Road was one key to this. National Geographic fellow Paul Salopek feeds his donkey Mouse. After another day foot-slogging through Uzbekistan's Kizilkum Desert, the sands were littered with potsherds from centuries of prior caravans. Follow his global storytelling walk online at outofeldenwalk.org. Surrounded by gift-giving friends and relatives, 5-year-old Beknur Bakhtiarov has just undergone a traditional circumcision at his home in Kiewa, Uzbekistan. The day began with a formal community gathering and ended with a party. Bronze camels at the Afrasiab Museum in Samarkand commemorate the city's long trading history. For hundreds of years, Samarkand was one of the most vibrant and sophisticated crossroads between East and West, a magnet for merchants and intellectuals who came here to exchange goods and ideas. Rising above. In the years since Superstorm Sandy battered homes along the New Jersey coast, residents have been putting them back up, way up. A house on Berkeley Lane in Seaside Park, New Jersey, appears poised to make a fresh start, raised and waiting for a new foundation, stripped bare, framing and plywood. Normal, simple houses designed to be at ground level take on a whole different look up in the air. Clockwise from top left, above Superstorm Sandy in New Jersey, on Paul Jones Drive in Brick Township, a large home sits on a dozen supports on Bay Point Drive in Toms River. The garage is open, but unreachable on Mizzen Road in Toms River. A classic colonial, has one topiary-style planting, and at the corner of Kingfisher Way and Grand Central Avenue in Lavalette, a house with blue siding towers over its neighbors. On Pine Street in Union Beach, New Jersey, the flowers in the window boxes may be plastic, but to me they represent the homeowner's attempt to normalcy. Further, a glimpse of what's new and next. Gorilla Doc. An orphan gorilla explores a sanctuary in the DRC with Gorilla Doctor's staff. To go further into Dian Fossey's legacy, watch Dian Fossey, Secrets in the Mist at 9/8 Central and December 4th in National Geographic. Investing in Solutions. From the president of National Geographic, Gary Nell stands before the bronze plaque of the world that was installed in 1932 in the lobby of the National Geographic Society, Washington, D.C.'s headquarters. This tradition is for the birds. This month, Jeffrey LeBaron, 63, marks his 30th year as director of the National Audubon Society annual Christmas bird count. Tens of thousands of bird watchers turn out for this event. It started in 1900. Scientists use its data to monitor bird population trends. Visions. China. Visitors navigate an ice maze at the Harbin National Ice Show, Ice and Snow Festival in Heilongjiang, China's northernmost province. Beginning each December, more than 1 million people come to admire attractions such as full-size castles, sculptures, and a 15-foot ice tower. Explore traditions, tales as old as time. Ornamental history. The shape of the ornament honoring Franklin D. Roosevelt evokes a tabletop radio, like those broadcast in the president's fireside chats into American homes. Roosevelt's beloved dog, Fala, sits near the Christmas tree. With the gifts, 4 stars towards the top of the ornament represents Roosevelt's historic 4 terms as president, and the chevron border recalls the design of the card case he carried. Endangered occupations. The snake charmer, the yarn threader, the broom maker. Traditional jobs in India can be varied as distinctive as the country's bright colors and rich flavors. Occupational diversity is on display in Marginal Trades Photographer's Supernov Portrait series, showcasing people at work primarily in West Bengal and Uttar Pradesh. Rajeshwar Halder is a cotton candy seller, also known as a Burachal Wala in West Bengal. He earns about $15 a week. The holy days, who celebrates the most? Rebirth of a hallowed root. Clouds drift over the taro fields with Hanalei National Wildlife Refuge on the Hawaiian island of Kauai. Dances step out of the past. The Aspara dance dates from Cambodia's medieval Angkorian civilization. The tradition nearly vanished in the 1970s when the Khmer Rouge regime selectively killed artists and intellectuals. But Aspara performances have resumed recently, part of an effort to reclaim Cambodia's cultural heritage. Holidays in space. New Year's Eve is a bigger holiday than Christmas because it's celebrated in all nations. Scott Kelly, astronaut. The biggest story on Earth is Earth itself. Photographer and explorer David Dubélé has been an ambassador for Rolex since the biggest story on Earth is Earth itself. Crusading for at-risk sharks. My research depends on technology, says Jessica Cramp. He uses satellite tags to track shark movement. Each time a shark fin breaks the water surface, its location is transmitted to her computer via satellite. To 20,000 leagues over the sea. Off the coast of Greenland on a February day with only minutes of sunlight, Ghislain Bardou plays with his son Robin and dog Kayak on the sea ice. A partnership to advance exploration. Two of the 20th century's most historic feats of exploration were the first summiting of Mount Everest by Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, above left to right. Seen here during their ascent and discovery of the North Pole, Robert Peary, who led the polar expedition, took the photo below in the vicinity of the North Pole. It shows one of the several flags planted by his own team, which included Inuits, Ukwea, Uta, Ingwa, Siglu, and Peary's fellow American Matthew Henson. Charting marks on sea giants. Brad Norman studies a whale shark in Australia's Ningaloo Marine Park. Known as gentle giants, the shark can reach 60 feet long. The animal empathizer. Marine biologist David Gruber scuba dives off Little Cayman in the Caribbean Cayman Islands. Democratizing ocean science. Shah Selbe at left and assistant Aaron Grimes uses a balloon rigged with a camera to map California's coastline. Deep Sea Sound Check. Based in Spain, Michael Andre oversees a project that monitors ocean noise. Its data inform policymakers on how to reduce noise impact on marine life. Diving deep in Chile's fjords. Fish farming and pollution are among the threats to the plant and animal species that live in the marine areas of Chile's Patagonia. Swimming with the sunfish. When you love what you're doing, it doesn't seem like work at all, says Tierney Thies, posing with a giant sunfish in the waters off San Diego. His robots raise awareness. David Lang hopes his drones, like this one in Monterey, California, will help land dwellers better understand the ocean. On the turtle trail. After gently catching a sea turtle, Mariana Fuentes takes samples, then tags and releases it. Tagging allows her to map habitat and distribution. A watchdog for the whales. We have the challenge, Asha Devaux says of this moment in marine conservation, but we may not always have the opportunity to tackle it. At home underwater, Grace Young researches how coral reefs are changing. She helps design artificial reefs that can be sunk to restore some ecosystems. Why is this black bear white? spirit bear. Conservation status. It is among the Earth's rarest bears, with an estimated population of a few hundred. Its habitat range are the islands and coast of the Great Bear Rainforest in British Columbia. Other facts. The name Ursus americanus kermode honors Francis Kermode, one of the first people to identify the subspecies of bear. That is all.